The Summer Games Minute, brought to you by Mass Mutual. For most professional athletes, versatility means they can play a few different positions in a single sport. For Babe Dietrichson-Zaharias, versatility means dominance across the entire spectrum of sport. In the 1932 Summer Games in Los Angeles, Zaharias won gold in the 80-meter hurdles and the javelin throw, plus she got a silver in the high jump. Running, throwing, jumping wasn't enough for Babe, so she became a competitive billiards player, then jumped into professional golf, winning 10 major championships, all the while making a few pitching appearances in Major League Baseball spring training games. Mass Mutual understands the nuances in how women want and need to manage their finances. With quality product solutions and guidance, a Mass Mutual financial professional can help you plan for both short-term and long-term money goals. Learn more and get started at massmutual.com.
Whoa, landing an account this big will totally change my landscaping business. It's gonna mean hiring more guys and more equipment and new trucks for the new guys to drive the new equipment in. I don't know if I'm ready.
You can do this, and Ford Pro FinSimple can help. Our experts are ready to make growing pains less painful for your business with flexible financing solutions that meet the needs of your business today when you need them. Get started at fordpro.com/financing.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
The Athletic.
What a race. The Grand Prix of the Americas could have been Pedro Acosta's first victory, one that would have made him MotoGP's youngest ever race winner. It could, for a few corners at least, have been Marc Marquez's first win on a Ducati. In the end, it was a Maverick Vinales victory, yet another Maverick Vinales victory in the context of the last few weeks. But from 11th place at the first corner, the man we thought couldn't overtake, couldn't come through the field, was only fast when completely in control of a race or in a test session, can hack his way up the order after all. What a way to win the best race in years in MotoGP. I'm Matt Beard. This is the Race MotoGP Podcast. With me are Val Khorounzhiy and Simon Patterson. All three of us reeling slightly from a race we thoroughly enjoyed and just seemed unpredictable right to the moment that Vinales took the lead and started disappearing. I think we absolutely loved this one, didn't we? And you actually, who was it predicted Vinales might win it quite early? I feel like this might have been, I'm not going to call you a Vinales super fan because you always hate that when I call you a fan of anybody, Val. But you have been the strongest and most loyal Vinales advocate out of all of us. It's fair to say myself and Simon have been absolute bastards about Vinales at times over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think I saw it coming. I can't tell you the exact lap, but definitely well before halfway. Honestly, I briefly lost belief. Like when he exits turn 1 in 11th, basically, that's where you're like, well, there's no way. It's impossible. And then you start and gain position after position after position, and you're starting to think, okay, it might happen. He gets stuck behind Enea Bastianini. That for me was the big test, basically. If he can clear Enea Bastianini in a decent amount of time, if he can clear a Ducati, that's usually, a roadblock when it's not feeling so good. And before the moment in the race where Bastianini's late race pace magic was inevitably going to kick in. But he cleared Bastianini, he cleared Miller, and from there on, honestly, was only ever going to go one way. And yet despite that, and despite the fact that the race win battle was basically decided maybe at the 60% mark, it was still exceptional. It was such a good race. I thoroughly enjoyed every moment of it, and I kind of enjoyed the fact that it cooled down in the second part, just because I sort of could gather myself and really take in what had happened instead of, going through every moment. I loved it. It reminded me a lot of, I don't remember the year, but do you remember the Assen race Marc Marquez won? Probably not the only Assen race he won, but one of them where it was this massive tussle in the early laps, just can't take your eyes off of it. And then he made it his in the end. This was kind of like that, but in an era of MotoGP, at a track that isn't Assen. It's a good track. It's not Assen. In an era of MotoGP where we're not really used to those kind of races. It's so good. It's exceptional.
It was the best race in Maverick Vinales' career. I'd go that far.
No doubt.
It was just stupendous. However, I feel really bad doing this. I'm still not convinced. I'm still not convinced because I feel like there's been... Do you know what the problem is, right? The problem is all Maverick's own fault. It's those opening 4 races of his Yamaha career. It's the fact that we saw something that we thought was there at the time and it just never happened. So I feel like he's betrayed me already in the past, and I need to see a long-term commitment from him before I can really trust him in this relationship.
Well, yeah, I think this is why me and you end up in the same place in the Vinales chat again and again, because for me, I loved what he did right the way up to May 2017. Basically, I thought he was great at Suzuki. I found him really interesting before Grand Prix level Moto3 champion. Sensational Moto2 rookie season, straight into MotoGP with that. I thought, I love this guy. He's going to be awesome. He's the perfect Yamaha signing when Jorge Lorenzo goes. First couple of months of that completely vindicates Yamaha and my belief in him. And then, after that. And, I've been very negative about Vinales every time he's been quick recently, because I've always said, just do it on the Sunday. Actually finish a race in front. Well, he has absolutely shut me up over the last few weeks.
Yeah. Just the first side thought is, I wonder if we're going to be asking in the coming races whether he likes a track with Michelin rubber put down more than a track with Dunlop rubber put down. So I can't stop thinking about it, even though it's probably a red herring. But for some reason, it's just...
Pirelli rubber.
Pirelli. Yeah, of course, Pirelli. But that's probably a red herring. I think I'm in the same boat as you guys. I'm not meaningfully different in that regard. I think there will still be dips to come. There will be ups and downs. That's the Maverick Vinales experience. We have 160 MotoGP starts of track record to look back on. I don't think one race outweighs 162. That's not how it works. I think his peaks may have been written off a little bit too much, and I think he may have gotten some criticism for some things that weren't entirely his fault. And I'm not even convinced that he suddenly just became a better racer or whatever. It's a mindset, it's a mentality, that kind of thing. I mean, he approached today's race really well. Clearly kept his composure after a start that could have absolutely ruined his brain. Going to 11th in a race you feel you should win. But the pace buffer was such that he clearly didn't have to have a sense of urgency that you would normally expect. I can't actually remember a MotoGP weekend in a while where somebody was this comfortable over the rest in terms of pace. And part of it is probably that for some reason everybody else chose softer tires, and we'll get to that in a second for whatever reason. But he had so much. He blitzed the pole record. He blitzed the sprint. Again, this is again going a bit forward, but Pecco Bagnaia mentioned that he felt Enea Bastianini could have won a race if Enea Bastianini had a tidier start. That's true, but it ignores the fact Vinales came through from 11th and still had a lot of margin to where he could have probably put an extra second or two of gap to the rest of the pack. I mean, I've just not seen this in MotoGP for a very long time, and this is what Maverick Vinales at his best is capable of, and I think that is an important reminder of the level of talent that is in there and is coaxed out somewhat, sometimes once in a blue moon. For some reason right now, 2 weekends in a row. Wonderful. All of our Christmases come at once.
Dude, I think that's why, I feel really bad beating down on the guy because he's had, the best weekend ever. But I think the reason why I'm so unconvinced about this long term is, see if he'd won that race in pole position by leading into turn 1 out of turn 1 and then won the race by 6 seconds, never having been further back than P1, I'd be more convinced than this. Because the performance we saw today was it was staggering. If you told me before the start of the race that someone would end up in P11 on the first lap and still win the race, I wouldn't have believed that anyone would have been capable of it, let alone Maverick Vinales, because he's so bad at it.
Yeah, he's the least likely person on the entire grid normally to come back in that situation, regardless of their speed advantage.
I would pick Taka and Luca over Maverick.
Oh, yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Exactly. And the fact that he did it is it makes, today's performance was stupendous. I've never seen a Maverick performance like it. I've never seen a performance like it from half the grid. And that almost makes me think that he was just on some like higher Zen level today where, he could walk on water and do no wrong. And that makes me less convinced that it's something that's easily replicable for the rest of the season.
I get it. I get it 100%. Honestly, I get it 1,000%. And it's just, I don't understand this race in many ways because, again, he was 11th. After the opening corner, and by the halfway point, he had it won. Like, that's what, again, everything goes back to Fermin Aldeguer with me, apparently. But that was, watching Fermin Aldeguer at the end of last season in Moto2 is exactly the same thing. Like, this doesn't make sense. This isn't how racing works in my brain. But at the same time, with all that said, how peaky Maverick is, how there's 100% going to be a weekend coming up where he's 17th for some reason. Qualifies 10th, 17th after the opening lap, and then finishes 10th again and goes, I don't know. But everything that's happened, Aprilia has to put a contract on his table now. 100% for me.
I mean, you say that, Val, but if he can replicate this form, then he's going to win the season by 1,000 points. And that's where the unconvincing bit comes from. It's like that. I genuinely I'm not trying to ham it up to counteract the fact that I was so negative about him in the beginning. It was such a good performance that if Maverick could do that every weekend, he'd be untouchable. And that's what takes me back to the very opening Yamaha days.
I mean, let's be clear, he should be leading the championship right now.
Yes.
If the bike worked in Portimao, it would have been a very good chance it would have been 4 consecutive wins.
Definitely.
And or at least, a win second.
At least 3 consecutive or three wins in a second.
Yeah. It's nonsense. It's very funny.
He's moved up from 8th to 3rd in the championship in the course of this weekend. He's now 24 points behind Jorge Martin. For most people, you would certainly look at those 2 weekends and that points gap and that momentum and say, surefire title contender. You can't quite trust Vinales to do that. I don't know. I'm very prone to extremely short-term opinions, and I'm kind of okay with that because hopefully it makes quite good listening sometimes. But also, this is the nature of covering modern sports. Calendars are so big, coverage is so non-stop. You're looking for micro narratives all the time, and so you do kind of jump onto short-term trends. In this case, this is a very long-term trend. Maverick Vinales has not made progress in races for as long as I can remember. Maverick Vinales has not delivered on his enormous potential reliably, regularly for so long. And yet, Val, you wrote a column for the race website within moments of the race finishing about this breakthrough, just saying the insane victory destroys every Vinales stereotype. And you did mention there a breakthrough that Vinales highlights in the bike's handling. Now, I'd take us through that in a moment. But to me, it doesn't sound big enough to account for Maverick Vinales going from guy who's often second best Aprilia, guy who is podium at best, to best rider on the grid winning by miles. But what does he credit for this kind of switch just flicking?
The idea that I had that column over in seconds makes me sound like such a fanboy. It makes it sound like I had it prepared in drafts, just waiting to uncork it.
For the day,
which thankfully isn't true.
Second most passionate Vinales column, I would say, after last winter's Why I Can't Give Up on MotoGP's ridiculed Test King, which has now been completely vindicated.
I write some things that age badly. That one has, I think, aged proper good. And honestly, if he dips again, yes. If he dips again, it will still have aged proper good. I insist. Yeah, just I don't understand the balance thing very well. That's the thing, and it's just the way he describes it. It's like they understood that he needs a bike that's well balanced on the front and the rear.
Yes.
Okay. I know that, and I've never ridden a MotoGP bike. I don't really understand what is meant by it. There's probably some sort of language barrier thing going on there, I suspect, or just a thing that he's trying to convey. Maybe that it was more about his maximizing his feel with the bike than even any kind of developments or anything like that. Which, if I was Maverick Vinales, I would also think that way because he knows that when he's on song, he is the best rider in MotoGP when he's on song. That just happens 5% of the time. He also, he likes Kota, clearly, but he doesn't like Kota this much. Kota's just weird. So let's start with that. This is not an insult, but we've seen some like freak rider-to-rider performances at COTA, and I think there's the impression that despite its wide variety of corners, it's a very sort of rider-driven track. If you feel good, you're fast. If you don't quite click with it, it gets exacerbated through every corner. And Vinales' record at COTA is good. It's not this. It's not Marc Marquez, but he looked like Marc Marquez this weekend. He had a Marc Marquez level advantage over the competition. He demolished the lap record. He won from 11th. Like, Maverick Vinales won the race after being 11th at turn 1. What are we doing here? What was even any of this? Is this some sort of pipe dream? Is this a computer simulation gone wrong? I feel like this is also important. I feel like sometimes it almost comes off as I'm being mean, and a lot of us are being mean. Like we joke about him too much. This comes from a huge place of admiration. Like the talent level here is staggering, and it has been through Moto3, through Moto2, through MotoGP, at Suzuki, for most of his time at Yamaha. The only time you doubted it is when Fabio Quartararo came in and started not quite like demolishing him, but beating him. Because you're not used to that. You're used to Maverick Vinales beating himself.
Yeah.
And now he's returned to a point that was like the pre-Quartararo point. Maybe it won't last in terms of consistency, but at least there's the peak. Welcome back.
And huge credit to Aprilia for getting this out of him. Now, when news first emerged, he was talking to Aprilia. That was a little bit before Aprilia's big breakthrough. It still sounded completely hysterical that Maverick Vinales would be leaving Yamaha for Aprilia. Then he got there in quite spectacular fashion, trying to destroy his Yamaha mid-race, mid-season. And then you kind of thought, okay, well, maybe this is going to be genius. Maybe moving to a manufacturer with lower expectations, a bit more centered around him, grow up with them. This could really click well. And then it was just flatline. Just the breakthrough you kept expecting never really came. But Aprilia's been very loyal to him. We've advocated on here quite often for Aprilia to have a complete clear out of riders, and I think we admire both Aprilia riders a lot, but we've wanted an established top liner to prove how good that bike is. Like you said, Val, his 2025 and beyond position is now substantially more secure. But yeah, I think you've got to give the team a lot of credit for being the place where this could happen. But I'm still a little bit surprised it took nearly 2 years before it looked remotely like this.
I'm starting to think that maybe not that Aleix Espargaro's been making this bike look better than it is, but the bike needed work. And the areas where the bike seemed to need the work are the areas where Maverick Vinales was weak. And maybe what we've seen is that this is just a bike that was so unsuited to him that it started a bit to take until now to work for him. And I'm almost specifically entirely talking about the clutch. And get the ability to get the bike off the line. That is something that these guys have really, really struggled with over the years. It's somewhere that Maverick, we know, has traditionally not been the best anyway. And it's they've been working super hard on it, and listening to him, yeah, he did, like, in his defense, he said on Friday that he had done his fastest ever Aprilia practice start, but that he's not doing anything any differently, that it's all coming from the stuff that they've been doing technically, mechanically, that the engineering team have been doing to try and help him. And I don't know, maybe that is what he needed, or maybe because Maverick's a bit of a psychological rider at the best of times anyway, it's at least what he thinks he needed. And once he had that little bit of confidence and that little bit of potential to start the bike better, it all clicked together, and suddenly he's able to do what he was able to do today. That is something that's hard to sustain, and that takes me back to what I was saying earlier about whether or not it is the real deal, if it's coming from him being a bit more confident now, because there are riders who thrive off confidence, and he is one of them. I don't know. I keep coming back to this. We need more time. We need more data points to figure out whether or not this is a blip or whether this is the way forward.
I think there is something to that theory, because I also think about, Aleix and Maverick have a lot of time for each other, but you could sometimes hear it in Maverick's comments, the almost hint at the idea that this is a bike built around Aleix, and certainly built around a very different type of rider to himself. And you could see it in like race aspects in particular, because I've looked back at all the Maverick wins today from before, and it wasn't like he wasn't doing the Jorge Lorenzo wins necessarily. There are a substantial amount of races where he dropped back at the start because he's been a bad starter, but then had a pretty easy time picking off through the field and worked the tire conservation well. And we've not really seen that so much at Aprilia. Like, the reason he didn't win a race for Aprilia last year is because, unlike Aleix, he didn't keep his tires together. This weekend, I mean, again, the edge of pace helps, but clearly he conserved his tires extremely well. I think that was working very well for him, and I think the longevity into the races is there again, which will also be a big part of this package. It's he's such an interesting rider. Just interesting. MotoGP is interesting. Maverick Vinales is interesting. Great time for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Congratulations to Maverick Vinales. Sorry for being quite so blunt about you a few times lately, but I can see. I don't think my logic is indefensible there. But yeah, we gave you the ultimate honor of starting the podcast with you, because we quite often have a bit of a sport of trying to get the race winner as deep into the podcast before they get the first mention as possible and go for slightly quirkier storylines. But frankly, the guy won both races, including from 11th on the first lap, so we did have to lead on him this time. But we had several strong contenders to lead the podcast episode on, though. And, well, strong-ish. Could have done it on a different day. Marc Marquez is always the COTA storyline. We had predicted quite confidently that this would be somewhere he would win his first race on a Ducati. But that started to fade in Friday practice, that expectation. And then for a couple of corners, it came very alive again before everything went wrong. So, Simon, tell us the story of Marc Marquez's COTA debut on a Ducati and how it ended.
I think we were robbed of a chance to get a real assessment of Marc Marquez here. The sprint race, he kind of rode off afterwards, to be fair. He said that there was still stuff that they're trying to figure out, they're trying to learn on the bike, and that, you know, it just hadn't quite clicked for them. He was pretty confident that they could make a few improvements for Sunday's main race, that they'd be able to get something better. And to be honest, we got something better than the sprint, but not great. And there was plenty to be optimistic about that. But it looked like he was making progress. It looked like he would be able to fight for the win, and then he crashed. The crash, he says, was the result of a mechanical problem. The brakes having an unexpected problem and not working the way that he expected them to. He said that it was something that had affected him the whole way through the race from the very, very beginning. And to be completely honest, Marc Marquez is not someone that makes excuses for his own crashes with technical problems. That is just not him. It never has been. And God knows he's done enough crashing over the years that, you know, he'd have ran out of technical excuses at this stage if it were the truth. So fully believe him, but also believe him when he says that wasn't a problem that appeared and caused him to crash. It was a problem that was there from the very beginning of the race. So as a result of that, I think we really don't know what would have been capable on Sunday for him. I think there was more to give if he'd been able to start the race in a fully functional bike. I think there was more to give if he'd been able to finish the race, even with a bike that wasn't working, despite that mistake. The crash itself, we kind of knew right away there was something not quite right about it, because it went so early into the corner.
Yeah.
I was doing the circuit comms this weekend, so I was sitting next to Kevin Schwantz talking about it when it happened, and both of us were like, "That was weird. Like, that wasn't a normal crash." So the excuse for it fits with what we saw, and the reality of it is that this wasn't an opportunity to see what he was capable of. It wasn't an opportunity to see what was capable in the long term. And I don't think we should read too much into it. He even said as much afterwards. He said that, he kind of hinted that someone had made a mistake, but maybe I'm wrong in that. Because he said that this was the sort of teething problem that happens with a new team. And whenever you're not used to working together, and that it was a learning experience, it won't happen again, they'll get on with it. Again, going back to how much Marc has crashed in the past, he's not going to be someone that's going to hold a grudge when someone else makes a mistake or something goes wrong, because he's done his fair share of his own mistakes over the years. So, yeah, I think I'm disappointed I'm not disappointed that we didn't see him finish the race. I'm disappointed that we didn't get the opportunity to fully learn anything about where he is with Ducati from this weekend because of what went wrong.
Yeah, I don't really have any doubts about the explanation either, because it's just watching the crash. It is early, but also it just feels like the speed isn't getting scrubbed off at all. I just feel like he's getting into a corner, like he forgot to brake or something, which obviously he didn't. This is Kota. He can do it with his eyes closed. So yeah, I don't think there was anything, like any cover up going on there. I think in a normal race with a normal functioning bike, we have to make the same concession for Maverick Vinales, so he's P2 behind Maverick Vinales, I think. What the weekend showed to me is there isn't that built-in Kota mega margin, I can win on a scooter type of thing anymore. And part of that does seem to be agility, he talked about, sector 1, the S's in particular, and how, his body just can't do it the way it used to through that part. And if you watched him in the sprint, in the S's in particular, looked terrible every time, really looked very off. It's remarkable how well he finished, given that he looked off. I think it was good in the race. I think he did sort it out a little bit. It's an interesting kind of weekend because it's both a little bit disappointing, but also genuinely very impressive at the same time. And I think we need to get to the elephant in the room now, which I think all of the MotoGP fans who tune in basically to every race, they will have already picked up on. That bike's weaker than the Works bike, isn't it? I mean, the Works bike has its gremlins, clearly, but the performance, look at the other 2023 Ducatis. They're not there at all. And they're good riders who are not there.
This is the big thing for me. I'm very much in two minds about Marquez this weekend. Part of me is, when he crashed, it was an odd crash, but part of me was thinking, I can understand how he could make a mistake because it feels like he's having to override a little bit with the bike he's still learning.
Yeah.
To make up for potentially some physical deficit, but also the bike's just not what a year-old Ducati should be doing at this point in the season, based on our recent expectations from the last few championships. It's just not that kind of fully tuned, better setup than all the new machinery just letting its riders reel off wins and podiums in the first third of the season. So if he had crashed out the lead in that circumstance, I wouldn't have been that surprised. When he explained the brake problem, you looked at the crash again and thought, okay, the physics of that makes sense. But yeah, it's his margin over the rest of the GP23s is phenomenal. In the sprint, the nearest one was 9 seconds back, nearly 10 in a 10-lap race. So let's just quick check the result against 10 places behind him. Yeah, something like that. He is by far the best. But by far the best of the year-old Ducati riders, 4/10 quicker in qualifying than the second best. He's doing incredible things with that bike, but we didn't think he was going to have to need to in this circumstance. And we had this kind of pre-season narrative that he might take a little bit of time to get settled in and get to Kota, one of his classic Marquez tracks. He'd win there, and that would set up a title bid, even if he wasn't kind of top of the championship before then. Well, coming away from Kota, he's 8th in the championship and he's 44 points behind Martin now, and not looking like he's got a bike competitive enough to take the fight to, well, on the basis of these last couple of weekends, to Aprilia, but also to the 2024 spec Ducati. So not necessarily for anything to do with Marc himself, not necessarily in a way that suggests this move isn't paying off, but through the circumstances of the GP23 being further behind the GP24 than we expected, and the clash of Bagnaia at Portimao and the brake problem and crash this weekend, do we have to start reassessing what this season's going to be for Marc Marquez, particularly given his points position now?
I mean, he was going to beat the other Ducatis today. So, and he did in the sprint, like not just the 23 Ducatis. And I want to say a small asterisk before that about the 23 Ducatis. I think Marc Marquez had a really weird weekend because he had basically an early sprint incident and then also got muscled down the order in the race. And it's at Kota turn 1. It's a bastard. So I think he's closer than the timing screen suggests, but he's not there with Marc. Marc is extra, and Marc this weekend had the 24 Ducatis, I think, just about covered too, although it also helped that the 24 Ducatis were having some nightmares of their own. I'm not ready to reassess fully yet, because I don't know how much margin Marc still has in terms of learning this 23 and how much he and his prodigious super talent can squeeze out of that bike. But it is clear, or I think that my feeling anyway, is that all the European manufacturers took really substantial steps forward with their 24 machines, like bigger than the teams leasing 2023 Ducatis will have hoped for. And, Gigi Dall'Igna did warn us at the end of last season that he thought the step between the 23 and the 24 Ducatis would be bigger than the 23 and 22. And last year, the 22 still at the end of the season was every bit as good as the 23. I think if the 24s fix their problem now, I think they're really hard to catch. But if there's somebody who can do it, it's still Marc.
I think that, well, from speaking to a few people in the paddock this weekend, actually, I think the gap between the 23 and the 24 isn't just more than the satellite teams with the 23 bike would have hoped for. I think it's more than they would have even thought possible, because it seems to be that the 24 bike is just, I've heard people describe it as the best motorbike ever built this weekend. Such is the level of the step forward that they've made with it. It is just incredible where they've taken that machine. And everyone else is playing catch up. Yeah, Marc Marquez is the only guy in the 23 bike that's able to even compete with them, let alone beat them. So I don't think this weekend really changes my assessment of his season. The only thing really that it makes different for me is that I would have said that, his year this year was going to be smattering of race wins and a sort of a half-assed title tilt that faded away a bit towards the end of the year. The only thing that's different in my opinion about it is that instead of winning 3 or 4 races, he's going to win 2 or 3 races, because I thought he would have had a win racked up this weekend. I thought this would have been the first one back again. And we're maybe going to have to wait. I don't know, it's Marc. We might have to wait until Jerez. We might have to wait until the almost sure thing of Sachsenring that you would have said this weekend was as well, but with a bit more time and experience on it, that's probably a bit closer to reality. I don't think he's going to be too upset with this weekend. I don't think it's going to change his year too much, and I think that's probably a realistic attitude that the rest of us should follow suit on.
Yeah, I see the logic of that, and I don't feel negative about his performances as such. I just think this championship situation is now looking much tougher. Yeah, like you, I didn't think he was a certain dominant champion this year by any means. I thought he'd be in the mix through consistency. And I think the events these 2 weekends have kind of robbed him of the chance to use that consistency, because he's now got to fight back from behind in a situation where I don't think he's got the firepower to do that.
I mean, for me, one thing that's quite telling, having seen the first 3 rounds now, is that whenever he came in the podcast before round 1 with us, and he gave us what I thought at the time was a fairly honest assessment of his season, he was pretty much bang on the money with that.
Yeah, he was, wasn't he? Yeah. Yeah, Marc, we should have listened to you and calmed ourselves down.
I still think he's more competitive than that, to be honest. But yeah, I know. But I still think there's, like, the standings aren't true.
No.
For me, the 44-point gap is not true. It's going to be a nightmare to eradicate, but It's not true.
You know we love talking stats here at The Athletic. Here's one that's super simple to remember. Discover automatically doubles the cash back you've earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cash Back Match. That means with Discover, you could turn $150 cash back to $300. That's right. You could put it towards some memorabilia you've had your eye on, or treat yourself to a premium sports network. You earn and Discover doubles. See terms at discover.com/credit card.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, how to get 30, how to get 20, 20, 20, how to get 20, 20, how to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Kroger worth it every time. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
The other strong contender for leading this podcast, as well as Vinales and Marc Marquez, was Pedro Acosta, who for a lot of the race looked like he might become MotoGP's youngest ever race winner at Austin. I don't know what else we can say about Acosta 3 weekends into his MotoGP career, because they're just all so incessantly impressive. But Val, have a go at saying something new about Pedro Acosta on the basis of his COTA performance.
I think he's breaking the works KTM's brains.
Yes, that's a
like
good,
that's what I think
point.
He's absolutely like, it's not just Jack Miller. He's turned. There's no way that the pressure from Pedro Acosta hasn't turned Brad Binder's brain into scrambled eggs this weekend at COTA. Binder had one of the worst MotoGP weekends from him that I can remember. Mr. Reliable, basically nothing went right for him, and there was a reason at every turn, and I don't necessarily doubt that. So let me walk you through them. On Friday, they were messing about with the setup, so just got out of their rhythm, didn't make the top 10. In Q1, he crashed on an outlap or something, so it was not workable from there. Didn't make the progress in the sprint. And in the race, at the start, coming through, again, that turn one, there were like 3 or 4 bikes in one place, and he took a huge whack from one of them. I believe it was from Marco Bezzecchi's VR46, because there were, I think, Raul Fernandez and Alex Marquez on the inside. And anyway, it took off the rear wing, it took off some other winglets, so he was riding a hobbled bike from there on. Like, those are good reasons, those are good explanations. I don't, like, if he gets a normal weekend, does he beat Pedro Acosta this weekend?
Not a chance.
I don't think so, because if he does, he wins the race, probably. It's 3 weekends into Pedro Acosta's MotoGP career, and the case for him being the strongest, best, fastest KTM rider is, it's not just kind of, you have to squint, it's overwhelming. I don't know what to say about that. It doesn't compute.
There's lots of excuses for why Brad Binder had a bad weekend, and they all kind of link to each other. But whenever you go back through the train far enough, he just wasn't quick enough. That's the reality. He had a bad race on Sunday because he lost a wing early on in the race. But he lost a wing early on in the race because he had a bad qualifying, and he was really far down the grid and had to scrap his way through. He had a really bad qualifying because he had to qualify in a 12-lap old tyre, because he crashed at the start of qualifying on the tyre that he had to go from Q1 to Q2. But he was in Q1 because he wasn't quick enough on Friday. And that's what it goes back to. They had a really, really bad weekend. And it compounded, and it left him in the mess that he was in through compounding it. But on a weekend, if he'd had an okay tyre and hadn't had that crash in qualifying, he would have maybe made it through Q2, maybe not. He probably wouldn't have started more than 3 or 4 places further forward than he was. He would have still had every chance of getting caught up in a mess in the first lap. And even if he hadn't, he'd have come out of turn 1 maybe 11th and rode to 8th. And Pedro Acosta was still in the podium way in front of him. And at the end of the day, that would have been worse than the weekend that he had, because at least he's got a few excuses to throw at it at the minute, instead of just the rookie was quicker than me, which is the reality. The rookie was quicker.
Yeah, I don't really see how the issues obscure that fundamental fact. And the same is true for Jack Miller, who I thought was actually having a reasonable weekend overall. I think he's okay at COTA. And in the race, his pace faded more than you'd expect. I know we kind of associate Jack Miller with fading pace in races, but his bike did take a big whack from Marc Marquez's Ducati in the early laps. I think that might have had something to do with it. But also, he wasn't laying a glove on Pedro either. All weekend. Can't do it. Not there. It's weekend 3. It's a very complicated circuit. The circuit of the Americas, and Pedro Acosta is riding for a satellite team. I think Tech 3 is very good, but come on, what's going on? What should KTM be thinking? I'm genuinely there's, at the end of the race, I look at the standings and I see the 26-point gap to Martin, and my brain's starting to go, are we here already? Because already, coming into the weekend, I was like, they have to basically budget 25 to where they go for the title with Pedro Acosta. Already, I think that is clear to me. They have to start 2025 going for the championship. I mean, how much can he improve in the coming races?
And on the other side of the factory garage, you know, I'm going to make the argument again that KTM should switch him and Jack Miller. I don't even think they should do it at the summer break, and I think they should do it tomorrow. Because Jack Miller had... everybody knew what was going to happen in Jack Miller's race. Everybody knew. Jack Miller starts on a soft rear tyre whenever the guys leading the race, including Pedro Acosta, are on mediums. He runs at the front, halfway near the front for 10 laps, and then falls off a cliff and barely finishes in the points. It is the most typical Jack Miller race ever, and it just proves that he is learning nothing. He just keeps doing the same things over and over again. The most telling KTM comment that anyone made on Sunday was in his debrief, we were talking about tyres with Augusto Fernandez, Pedro's teammate, and he said, Acosta chose the medium. We all chose the medium soft. Rookie got it right. A bit embarrassing, really, wasn't it?
Bless him.
He's on the money.
Yeah, I feel really sorry for Augusto Fernandez, who is struggling this season anyway, and he's got the misfortune to come up against a rookie this good as a teammate while having a bit of a struggle. And
he's kind of lucky. I haven't thought of the gap between him and Acosta all weekend at any point, because that's not who we're measuring Acosta by anymore. Like, it would be really, really, it would be worse optics for Augusto Fernandez if Pedro Acosta was slightly slower, because then he'd just be embarrassing Augusto Fernandez instead of embarrassing Brad Binder and Jack Miller and taking the heat off
half the grid.
Yeah, exactly.
When you measure Augusto Fernandez against the other KTMs, he was one position behind factory racer Jack Miller. It's not that bad.
This is why I think Jack Miller, because Augusto's still not in sync. So this is why I think there was something not right with the bike, because I don't think that's quite the real gap. But it almost doesn't matter relative to Acosta, if that makes any sense. I think it does.
Well, you said earlier about how Vinales' performance was one of those things you look at and go, is that actually real? Did I dream that? Did that definitely happen? The level Acosta is delivering at feels the same. Like, you look at what he's done in these 3 weekends, you look at how he's answered every question that would have been posed of him. Every weakness that we've seen is addressed at the next race. Or the next day, even the way he handled the race from the sprint to the Grand Prix at Kota was a good example of him sorting out some problems from one race to the next, then just absolutely nailing it. The kid is he still 19? Is he turning 20? Yeah, there's so much to come from him with 3 weekends in. It's so ominous for the next 10 years. What chance does anybody else have for the next few years of MotoGP when Acosta is performing at this level this early? It seems unreal. It seems more unreal than the early Marc Marquez performances. It seems like the level of unreal Marc Marquez was at pre-MotoGP, when everyone was assuming he was running a bent engine or something in the 125s of Moto2, because his margin was just so completely insane in those categories. It's like, how is this possible? The kid must be genuinely that good. And I can totally see a title bid this season. Perhaps the main thing that I think will get in the way of that is the guy I want to talk about next, and that's Jorge Martin, who I think is actually having a really stunning season for, just in a very un-Martin way, racking up points on days when he probably shouldn't. Now, as I say that, I want to contradict myself immediately, because you look at Martin's weekend on the one hand and you go, third and fourth in the 2 races, maintaining a 21-point championship lead, sensible points gathering, good title bid practice. You also look at Martin's weekend and you go, crashed twice in Q2 alone. Put a move on at the first lap of the Grand Prix that could have wiped out 4 riders, and was somewhat lucky it didn't. So he's still also being Jorge Martin, but managing to get it to the finish. How do we rate Martin's weekend and Martin as current championship leader and championship favourite? Because he is, like I say, he's showing signs of greater maturity than last year, but also still doing some really Martin-ish things. I mean, he said Pecco Bagnaia was championship favourite still after the race. I think that's nonsense at this point. If I'm being entirely honest, I don't agree with that shortly as well. Yeah.
He also said that he's not looking at the championship and then named the specific amount of points that he has, which I always is my favorite. Just a PSA to riders, if any riders are listening to this for some reason, first of all, go prepare for the next race. What are you doing? Second of all, you can talk about the championship. It's fine. We won't be clowning on you if you've then lost 20 points in a weekend, or if you've said, it's looking good for me. Everybody has eyes. It's fine. There's no jinxing here. Nothing metaphysical going on. It is fine to talk about the championship. That is why we are all here. Away with this, I'm just focusing weekend by weekend stuff. And that's not aimed at Jorge Martin. Every rider and every driver and every sportsman does that. And
every sports person.
I hate it. I hate it so much. I'd like to believe...
After this rant, Val, they will mend their ways.
Finally.
It'll be fine.
Yeah,
you solved it.
The world's gonna be healed. There were two things I didn't like, and the crashes are one, because he got a little bit fortunate there. Not just in terms of not getting injured or whatever, because when you shut twice in Q2, that's normally P12 on the grid, which makes your races so much harder. At least P6 left him in a position to where he could still, by dive bombing in turn 1, but not really. Like, I've rewatched it, it was better than it looked. But by dive bombing to turn 1, he put himself in a position to be fighting for the lead right away. Whereas if he qualified P12, that dream would have been gone. And the second thing that I didn't like is that it shows the soft rear. But I also didn't like it for all of the Ducatis. I'm just really confused. I don't think I have a great understanding yet of what happened or why they did it. So you hear the Ducatis, all of the GB24s in particular, talk the whole time about how the soft rear is giving him chatter. They're chattering on the soft rear, and it's, the pace goes away after a few laps. The pace dips weirdly because we all have chatter. We're chattering. We all have chatter. The chatter's worse on the softer tire. Go with the medium. What are you doing? Instead, all of the Ducatis went with the soft, with the soft, including Martin, who said that he couldn't pick the medium because he hadn't tried it, which I don't even understand how that works. There's 2 different rear tires in the weekend. What do you mean you haven't tried it? I think I must have misunderstood something. Didn't like that. But he's quick enough to be leading the championship. I think that's fair, and I think he is, on the balance of things, the championship favorite. But my brain is just messed up after Coda. I don't really understand what's going on in this championship race. I don't understand who's fast and what reason they're fast for. I only know that Jorge Martin's going to demolish some lap records. Again, going further into the season, I guarantee you that much. He did for a bit this weekend, even though Maverick Vinales ultimately reeled him in. But I think most weekends we'll see at least one session where Jorge Martin does something ludicrous to the lap time over a single lap. And he's doing okay in races, and he's bagging the points. He's doing good.
I think the biggest mistake that Jorge Martin made this weekend, and maybe it's a sign that there's, I don't know, maybe I'm completely misreading this, but maybe it is a sign that there's still a little bit of, maybe not insecurity, but like uncertainty in his decision making. I think that all the Ducatis followed the lead of Pecco Bagnaia today in using that soft tire, and I think that Martin's maybe still a little bit, I don't know, maybe he's a little bit unconfident in his own decision making when it comes to things like that, and it could be because Phillip Island bit him in the ass so dramatically whenever he was the one guy that went off and did something different back in October last year. But Bagnaia tried something really odd this weekend and used his sprint tire in the warm-up this morning to try and see if it would last a few more laps and if that would work for race distance, and that seems to have been enough to convince him that it would. But I mean, it's also worth looking at what everyone else was doing at that point, the non-Ducati riders, and Maverick was in the same boat. He kind of toyed with the idea of using the soft rear. He went with the medium, was the right choice. And I think maybe we saw Martin just playing a little bit of follow the leader there. That's the weird thing about him. There's days when he looks undeniably like the fastest Ducati rider by a really big margin. But it's almost like because he's not in the factory team, he still doesn't see himself as a factory rider, and he's not trying to lead the ship. And that kind of traps him and messes him up, trips him up a bit, and it comes back to bite him now and then. And I think this weekend was one of those weekends where he should have tried to be his own man and, kind of split the Pramac thing off from the way that the factory team was doing it and be a bit more confident in his decision making.
I mean, I want to go back to that soft tire thing, because as I mentioned, Pecco Bagnaia said that Enea Bastianini could have won this race, and Enea Bastianini ran the soft tire, and for Bagnaia that is evidence that the soft rear tire was a good choice. The reason I don't agree with that right now, the way I see it, and I don't have their data, but the way I see it is, yes, Bastianini was hamstrung by a less than ideal sort of sequence of early laps where he was just making errors and losing positions, but at the end of that sequence, he was still ahead of Maverick Vinales, who got punted. And Maverick Vinales on the medium rear tire, breathed past him and then and then went on to win the race. And in a normal race, again, they're not touching Maverick on the medium. And Pedro Acosta kept the medium alive, and I think he would have had trouble with the soft. He admitted in the post-race press conference that he would not have gotten the soft to the end. And also, just don't use Enea Bastianini as a tire reference. There's magic going on there. You know it. You've seen it before. Enea Bastianini sometimes pulls out the fastest lap of the race on the final lap on rims. That's what he does. Well, they're not rims because he hasn't used them, because he doesn't wear tires like the normal person. Should we pivot to Pecco Bagnaia now in our part of the discussion? Because he just had...
I think, yeah, absolutely. You've brought him in. This is not working this season right now. I know it's a small sample set. It's only three races in, but this is 2 weekends in a row now. We've looked at Pecco's pace in races, particularly, and gone, it's just not happening. It's just not moving forward. He had explanations for things this weekend, but yeah, he is not looking like the Pecco Bagnaia we're expected right now.
It was really, really interesting after the race that he made a comparison to the start of 2022 and how he had to start that season defensively and trying to limit his damage in the championship, and then was able to come back and win the title. But I thought to make that reference, I mean, yeah, we can see it in paper that is pretty much what's happening. And if he wants to win the championship, he's going to have to, turn things around at some point. But strange given how good preseason was, how good that bike is, how well Martin is making the bike work, that it's just not there for him. He complained after the race on Sunday, once again, chatter, which seems to be like this mysterious thing at the minute with Ducati that comes and goes. Some riders have it some weekends, the others don't, and then next weekend it's the other way round. But it's odd that it seems to come on and off so badly for him, and that they're no further forward to find a solution to it. I mean, it could mean that they figure out what's wrong, they fix it, they spend one race weekend rebuilding, and he wins the next 6, because that is entirely on par for Pecco Bagnaia, and it's why he's limiting the damage at the minute in terms of his own head and what he's saying about that 2022 season. But it's odd.
Yeah, but I think that's also part of the 22 reference, because obviously they were troubleshooting the new bike to start that season. And I think in his mind, the chatter issue is a 24 issue. Some 23 riders also mention it, but it's more the 24 riders bring it up more.
It seems like the 23 chatter is different.
Yeah.
In some ways, from the 24 chatter, they're two different problems.
Yeah, but then the part that I don't understand is why he ran the soft, because that seems to be what makes it worse. At the same time, I do understand what he meant, because when we listened to his Saturday debrief, Simon, there was almost like a hint of a Michelin tire problem that didn't really come up at all on Sunday, despite him having basically a very similar Sunday race. And I understood part of his case, because he said that earlier in practice, he ran a soft rear that was like 10 laps old, and he was like 0.8 faster. And I saw that on the live timing screens and saw that on the timesheets. I remember watching that race and opening the document and seeing that particular lap time and going, ooh, Pecco might have some mega longevity this weekend. And we never saw any of it in either of the races. So it's this weird peakiness that's going on right now that they really, really need to get to the bottom of why their bike isn't consistently sweet, why it's so weirdly peaky, particularly in race distances, because he looked like a sitting duck in both races. Just usually he fixes it by Sunday.
Yeah,
it wasn't fixed.
No, this is it. A couple of podcasts back after Qatar, you mentioned that the sprint and Grand Prix format is terrible for everyone else because you've got someone as cerebral as Bagnaia. I can just learn from sprint mistakes, fine-tune the bike, win on Sunday. It's looking the opposite in some. His Portimao Sunday pace was not great, and you wonder after his poor sprint at Austin, is he going to fix it for Sunday? Didn't look like it at all at any point.
If Pecco Bagnaia had run the medium tyre on Sunday, he would have finished in the podium, and Jorge Martin would probably have won the race because he'd have copied him.
Yeah,
I genuinely also believe that on medium. I actually think he might have won, but I'm not a Ducati engineer. They had reasons not to pick it. I just don't fully understand it because the way the race played out, it looks wrong to me.
I'd love to know sometimes the process that goes into Ducati in particular picking tires, because we know that they've got an AI system that crunches numbers on tire data, and I'd love to know how often they go with what the AI says and how often they ignore it and go with what the rider feels. That would be a really interesting comparison sheet to see.
Or look, what one particular rider feels, and everyone else is looking at that rider going, "Oh, yeah, now we know what tire to pick." So we're not.
Yeah.
We're not an outlier compared to Pecco. Now, that 2022 comparison, I think, is really instructive for what happens next, because I don't think the same thing can happen next. So sprints skew this, but after 3 events in 2022, Pecco was only 14th in the World Championship. He had an awful start to that season. It wasn't all about pace. There'd been shunts and stuff as well. He comes back to win the championship, goes on an amazing tear. But really, that season, the only person he really properly had to beat consistently was Fabio Quartararo on a fading Yamaha. Yeah. This season, Aprilia's in better shape. Pedro Acosta is here on a KTM that's in better shape. Marc Marquez is now on a year-old Ducati. Jorge Martin is just improving himself, nailing his weaknesses. And Enea Bastianini looks now he's got his act together, like he's a stronger Ducati teammate than Jack Miller was for Bagnaia back then. There are so many things in the way of Bagnaia repeating that 2022 comeback. He's not as far behind. Well, sprints and stuff, percentages skew it. He's actually, in points terms, he's about the same amount of points behind. But I cannot see this happening. Even if Pecco gets back to last year's form, there's other people on that form too.
I think it won't be as easy as... Certainly, 2022 wasn't easy. Nothing is easy, but it won't be as straightforward, obviously, because of the Quartararo factory you pointed out and the fact that Yamaha was just not getting it done at all at that point. But also, it does help that there are so many riders suddenly capable of winning every weekend that, because otherwise, it was entirely possible Martin goes 12-25 this weekend, for instance, and then you're really in trouble. Then you're really in a bad spot. It's interesting, and it's been such a good season right now. I want to highlight how weird it's been by asking both of you one question. Have either of you noticed who leads the BMW M Pole Award standings this year?
Is it still Bastianini?
Yeah.
Yes, of course it is, because I saw that standing after qualifying.
It would have been weird if they changed it after qualifying.
Yes, indeed. It's because there's 2 races. The idea of it still the same points being there on Sunday as Saturday just skewed me for a second. But yeah, I love to sort of that. Well, this is completely ridiculous, isn't it? That's the man who never really bothers with qualifying because that is not his strength. Is the year's top qualifier. That's just nonsense.
Jewelry can say many things on your wedding day. As a wedding band, it can say, "This is a forever symbol of our forever love." As a gift to your wedding party, it can say, "Thanks for standing up there with us." Blue Nile can help you find the piece that says it all and says it beautifully, with expert guidance and a wide assortment of jewelry of the highest quality at the best price. Go to BlueNile.com and experience the convenience of shopping Blue Nile, the original online jeweler since 1999. That's BlueNile.com.
So we were discussing during this race whether it was the best MotoGP race ever / in a long time, basically comparing superlatives over it. Now, a lot of people are very critical of this era of MotoGP. Sometimes we are as well. The bikes are covered in aero. Dirty air is now a thing in MotoGP. We have had some boring races by MotoGP standards. Every time that crops up, I go back to the fact that I think a lot of people exaggerate the quality of the racing in what is seen as its halcyon days. And I talk about how many times I'm certain I remember Casey Stoner, Danny Pedrosa, Valentino Rossi, or Jorge Lorenzo just processioning a race by dominating it. The late 2000s, I don't think were great. The Rossi halcyon era saw some great racing, but he had such a margin a lot of the time. I feel like this is a really competitive era. The racing is perhaps not as good as it was in the first few years of concession to control electronics, where it was so unpredictable all over the place. But watching today, I don't see a lot wrong with this product at all. That was an absolutely outstanding motor race that we were jumping up and down in electronic form about all the way through. Am I being overexcited based on a sample set of one, or is this aero racing situation, tire pressures wrecking everything situation, not actually that bad, really?
I think it's partly the nature of this track. and just I think a bit of a blip. To be honest, I'm not getting too excited about it. I mean, pretty much all the moves we saw came turn 11 or turn 12. Or turn 1. They were big, late, deep brake dives, where 9 times out of 10 they actually ended up switching positions again on the exit, because they tend to be these really, really tight corners, those 3 tight, heavy braking corners where they hook back on themselves. So there was a lot of passes made there, but maybe not necessarily a huge amount of overtaking. There was quite a bit of overtaking that was done on the big long back straight, which is huge. And Sunday's race was great. It really, really was. But the sprint was pretty dull.
Yeah.
In fact, the sprint was a straight up procession. So, it's a bit like Maverick again. I feel like I'm beating on him at every opportunity here. But let's not judge the whole product based on one event.
Yeah, I agree, but also I'm starting from a different baseline to Simon. I think it's good. I think it's been good. I had no particular issue with the sprint. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't great, but it was very far from the worst race I've seen this season. Let's put it that way. I just, I look back I decided to pick a race at random from those halcyon-ish days, let's say. Right, Matt? Let's go COTA 2013, right? Mm-hmm. Marc Marquez's first win. Marquez's first. In 5th place, Stefan Bradl, 13 seconds back. In 10th place, Andrea Iannone, 42 seconds back.
Ouch.
We're doing a lot of things right, man. And yes, there are issues that do seem easily fixable, and there are issues, and we sometimes, races just get completely compromised by the fact that everybody's tires overheat and they can't really run close enough to one another. And we will have races like that going forward this season. It's not as good as it could be, but it's clearly good. And today was very good. A big part of it is also that, whatever the bikes are and whatever the mechanics of the races are, the fact is we show up every weekend and we don't know who's going to win, which is huge. It's absolutely massive. You cannot overstate it. I think that even makes processions tolerable in a way. I mean, we've not really had processions. We're not in crisis mode. We never were. The racing is still, as a baseline, pretty good. It does not drop below a level to where you don't switch on. For me,
I will say one thing for it. The first race after it was announced that an American company were taking over the championship in America, they couldn't have scripted that. They could not have scripted that. And I know the Liberty deal isn't finalised and there's still loads of work to do, etc., etc., etc. But MotoGP, Dorna should chop up a highlights reel from that race that's 3 minutes long and just cold call every news outlet in North America with it and say, hey, would you like to run this for free? Because, regardless of how good or bad it was relative, or whether it was a blip or whatever, it was really, really good. And they should be, that is the sort of race you use to sell your championship. I think F1 would probably, without, I'm not saying this to diss an F1, but F1 would kill for a race like that.
Oh, completely.
And we should maybe remember that sometimes, that, what we have might not be what we used to have, because it's I still don't think it's as good as the 2016 to 2019 era, but we should be celebrating the ones that we do have that are that good.
Yeah, completely. I think I can sometimes be too generous to MotoGP, perhaps in the eyes of a veteran fan, because I still see myself as a relative latecomer in that I've only been following it 18 years, which is actually quite a lot now, but relative to a lot of listeners and a lot of fans, it is not. I grew up following car racing and then got into MotoGP around the kind of Yamaha Rossi era, basically. But yeah, a bad MotoGP race is still generally better than the majority of Formula One races in terms of pure spectacle. I thought the sprint was rubbish this weekend. I felt very flat at the end of that, but that's partly because qualifying had built up something so impressive with Vinales on pole, and that always gives you the element of what is this guy going to do on race day? Probably go backwards. Not this time. Well, backwards then forwards. Acosta on the front row, Marquez on the front row at COTA, Pecco right behind them, Martin looking so fast, but only 6th on the grid. There was so much at the end of the qualifying session that you go, wow, this could really be an amazing race and strong narrative. And then Saturday just wasn't. Well, Sunday properly lived up to that. And the other thing that I'm definitely really enjoying about this season, this era, is the element of jeopardy on whether it's actually going to be a good race or not. I think adds to the enjoyment when it is, in a way, because you're not guaranteed it's going to be a procession each time. It's not going to be like that, which you expect that in F1, and a good passing move is like, oh, that's a bonus. Whereas in MotoGP, sometimes it's a disappointing procession. More often than not, it isn't. But also, it's not like every lap matters. It's not like a race where, passing is so easy and the tyre wear is so predictable that you can do 19 laps of faffing about and then it all gets settled right at the end.
The analogy I made after the race to someone I bumped into was that the sprint race was one of those nights out that you've been planning for weeks with your mates and really looking forward to, and then you get there and it's a bit flat. Whereas Sunday's race was one of those nights out that you kind of go to the pub and then bump into your friends who you don't expect to see there, and it turns out to be the best night out ever.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it was improved by the lack of anticipation.
Yeah, and I totally get that.
It really helps, but it is also sort of gaming the system that we do get 2 cracks of the whip at having a good race, right? Because ultimately, if it plays out slightly differently, we might just have 2 Maverick Vinales walkovers. There's an entirely possible outcome to this weekend. And I think, look, I have my issues with the sprints in terms of like the injury rates and just the fact that my heart rate spikes more often in a weekend, and I fear for the rider's health when I watch him, like that downhill section at Kota every time this weekend in races I watched. I winced. The S's. I mean, we've seen a crash in Moto3 in the S's where the bike and the rider just came back onto the track, and it should have been a ramp situation, but we thankfully got fortunate with Colin Vire, and it was all fine. But that there's more risk, and it feels like that just came in without really much of an assessment of that. But as a format, and I know like Simon and I disagreed over this at the end of last season at Valencia, because obviously I think everybody who does all those races every weekend on track, the burnout is huge, and the sprints only add to that so much. There's so much to keep track of and so much going on. But it does feel right now like basically every session matters a lot. Friday matters a lot. Friday ruined Brad Binder's weekend. We already knew after Friday a lot of really interesting stuff. Again, this, as always, goes back to how much Val just hates practice. That doesn't count for anything, doesn't it? This whole sentence, this whole big speech was just Val hates practice.
You're not wrong. You're absolutely not wrong. So I think we've agreed that MotoGP is not as bad as we sometimes think it is. In fact, it's absolutely excellent. During this race, I was thinking I'm enjoying myself so much watching this, and I've got the privilege of doing a podcast about it later as well. I feel very fortunate to be in this position. Listeners, thank you for allowing us to be in this position by continuing to listen. We have got so much more to talk about from this race weekend and from the first 3 rounds of the season that we're going to basically follow it up by looking at some bigger... Simon's going to interrupt me straight away by adding something else to this episode.
Oh, yeah, no. So before we go, I just want to say a huge thank you to the absolutely massive number of North American listeners we have who've come up to tell me what a good job we're doing the podcast this weekend.
Oh, lovely. Like,
there are so many people here this weekend who've come to say thanks and to say that they love listening to the podcast. I can't walk up the paddock without someone new stopping to tell me that they love the podcast. So to everyone I spoke to this weekend about it, thank you guys so much. It was amazing.
Oh, no, that is very much appreciated. Like we say a few times, every time we open up to listen to questions, we get so many from America. And fair play to you guys following MotoGP from there, because you have not had a home hero to cheer for a long time now. Your loyalty to MotoGP is appreciated as well. But yeah, like I was saying, we've got a lot to talk about from this weekend. I said before the weekend that whatever happened to Alex Rins, I'd want to do a segment on him because the fall from grace was so huge. Didn't get there, but in a way, these pre-European rounds like the kind of taster before the bulk of the season starts. So when we come back next week, we'll be looking at kind of... Oh, Val's interrupting me again.
Let's do a one-word Alex Rins, what happened to Alex Rins segment. Yamaha, full stop.
He won on LCR Honda this time last year. But again, oh my gosh, Honda this weekend also needs a segment. Honda seems to find a new way to reach Nadir. Every time we start recording, it's desperate. Marco Bezzecchi's weekend, Val, you were suggesting it wasn't that bad. It was. We got a little bit into Brad Binder. Basically, there's a lot of riders, a lot of teams who are heading for the European season in even worse shape than we hoped. So that might be the theme of next week's episode.
I can round up the Honda situation in one line, quoting Joan Mir. Luca Marini is a survivor, but the situation is desperate.
Yeah, absolutely. So this time next week, we're back in your ears talking about desperately unsuccessful teams and riders. But for now, we'll leave you to reflect on an absolutely brilliant performance by Maverick Vinales. Thanks for your company. Hope you enjoyed us talking about it. And we're back in your ears this time next week.
The Athletic.